Hello and welcome to RuggaMatrix International, episode 216. I'm your host, Juro Sen. I'm here with Ben Kimber. Ben, it is the Fireside chat here tonight. I'm actually doing a review of the TV behind me, but welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Juro. I feel like I should have a pipe and slippers on today, mate. It feels very nice in this remodeled RuggaMatrix studio.
Yes, we're in a Swish Sydney hotel tonight, but that's because also the RuggaMatrix studio is being remodeled, and it's got a great video wall you'll have behind us, and it's going to look pretty cool. So that'll be up and running for next week, but we're going to fire out a single shot here between Ben and I as we talk Bledisloe Cup. And of course, I can say gladly that I've had a drink out of the Bledisloe Cup as part of a victorious management team. It's been a long drought though, Ben Kimber, and there's been a few war of words this week between the two coaches, Australia v New Zealand this week in Sydney. Thoughts?
Yeah, we saw a little bit of activity there. Steve Hansen's fired a couple of shots across Checker's bow a couple of times lately. Checker, I think, probably has very pent up. I think he's very pent up. I think he didn't say a lot when the English were here. Steve Hansen had a crack from across the ditch there.
You'd be dying to say something back.
I think he would be. So there's been a little bit, but I think there'd be still some feeling out there from Checker. You can't really fire shots when you keep ending up on the wrong side of the scoreboard. That's
true. You can't really. You have to shut up because you can't be arrogant about it all. And I know the line from Check is, it's easy to kick people while they're down. So he's actually having a shot as well, like, the arrogance of the Kiwis. But hey, I remember when we won 5 years or had the Cup 5 years in a row, talking with normal New Zealanders, they used to say, gee, you got a great team. That was always the adulation. There was never anything negative from the Kiwis. And even though you remember those results, they were so close.
Yeah, but they're not saying that now, though, are they?
No. It's so long, though, isn't it?
It is. It's been interesting, I think, with Steve Hansen. I mean, top of the world. Got the best team in the world by some margin. World Cup champions. They want that rugby championship back, clearly. But Hansen doesn't need to have pot shots. He can just go about his way. But he likes to put it out there a little bit. I think he gets asked a question, he give an answer. The back and forth this week was really just a little bit of nothing. I think Checker was almost giving them a bit of a compliment, the All Blacks, and saying they've got some selection conundrums on their hands.
I think that's what it was, wasn't it?
Yeah. They've got some selection conundrums on their hands, open side and 5'8", and he's got some choices to make. Whether Hansen saw that as a bit of niggle or not, he gave a little slap back, but really mild stuff, I think, in what's going to be a big week of football.
Yeah, but we'll give the press and media something to talk about. I did see one headline that said it was out of control. I don't think it's out of control.
No.
Donald Trump's out of control.
Mate, we're waiting for Checker to get out of control. He's been so controlled now for so many weeks. I'd love to see him start to have more of a crack.
There's been look, let's go through it. I mentioned, is Australia a chance? But, based on Super Rugby form, you'd have to think the Wallabies are going to get absolutely hammered. But there is a bit of a different scenario here because there are several key players with great experience that didn't play Super Rugby. And I'm talking about the players from overseas who are coming back in the fold, like Drew Mitchell and Matt Giteau. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, you say based on Super Rugby form, but based on Super Rugby form, Romania could be a chance against us just quietly the way that we're going. And it is a really interesting discussion around these veteran players from Europe who are coming back in. And no matter who you talk to in rugby, the standard that they're playing at in Europe is not up to the standard anywhere near it, or really probably even the Super 12. Super 12, I'm going back in time.
Really?
There.
Do you think so?
Well,
I think it's a different type of rugby.
It's a different type of rugby, but,
And if that were the case, Ben, why wouldn't someone who goes there from the Southern Hemisphere carve up every week?
Let me put it another way. Do you think that Matt Giteau has been facing teams week in and week out like the New Zealand teams in the Super Rugby Championship?
I don't think so, but what he is facing is a harder slog week to week. I think battle hardened for Test rugby, and I think that's a different kettle of fish to what's happening in Super Rugby. So I think out of all of our players, the European-based players are actually better placed for a Test match.
That's interesting, because I've been sort of tossing up in my head whether it's a weakness or a strength to have these guys coming back in. It's almost as if, though, if you were able to set Australian rugby up the way you wanted to, you wouldn't need these guys, right? You'd have your Super Rugby teams firing, you'd have enough players at your command that you go, a bloke playing on the other side of the world, I don't need to ship him back in. I can have a guy that's been in my systems and in my direct view and bring them into the side. So these guys who can come back in. There's also the question of age. I think Spiro Zavos in the Herald had a bit of a crack and said, wrong thing to do. I don't agree.
You talk about Spiro's age.
That's right. I don't agree with that at all. I think, if those guys have something to contribute, of course you pick them. You're not always picking for the future. You're not always planning 3 or 4 years out.
Okay.
But I don't know. I think it just feels like almost all of that seniority is coming in from outside a little bit.
Yeah, and you raise a good point. Picking for the future, that should never come into play when you're playing a test match. You should always play your best players. Now you can look to the future as long as there's a guy that comes in that can benefit from the exposure to a mostly experienced side. And I think the Queensland Rugby League team in State of Origin do this really well. They bring in maybe a greenhorn who experiences a couple of matches, may not go that well, but they've got a really strong core of players who get them across the line, and then they are battle hardened then for the games ahead, and they've done it beautifully because they've dominated for so long.
Yeah. So the man management Checker has to show here. What I think is really interesting when you see Michael Checker pick a squad is he definitely tries to walk the talk, like from what he says.
Yeah.
He talks about picking on form. He talks about anyone can make the squad. I actually sometimes feel like he deliberately picks a couple of smokies just to set a tone. He's going to pick an extended squad. He'll pick a couple of guys that you don't expect, and I think that's as much to give every Australian rugby player a thought that, geez, actually I could I play well, I'm going to get picked here, as it is to keep the guys in the squad on their toes. But when it gets down to it, if he fills the squad, the team that takes the park now with his veterans and with the guys out of Europe, we don't see enough of that. It'll be interesting to see. Case in point for me, Nick Frisby out of the squad, Will Genia into the squad. If the halves end up being Will Genia and Quade Cooper, I feel like we've gone full circle.
Yeah, absolutely. Is Quade an option, really?
He's in the squad. It's got to be an option. And 5'8", you and I have talked about Bernard Foley now for some time. 5'8" has not been locked down for some time.
No.
We know even when Quade was active in Australian rugby, he had his chances in and out of the side. We haven't found someone who owns the spot.
I think kicking has been the issue, though, there for Bernard Foley. So it may pollute everyone's opinions of how good a player he is. But 9 and 10 have to work well. It is difficult to see these players come back in from Europe to then gel with a squad back here. But in the end, preparation has to be pretty. It has to be done in a way where you can get guys in and they gel it together pretty quickly. It wasn't that long ago when those guys were part of the Wallaby setup for the World Cup anyway. So most of the systems will be in place. But I think if you look at the New Zealanders and the initial comment from the Australian coach and Michael Checker is that they do have so many great players. It does make it difficult to actually say, okay, does Beauden Barrett get a go? Because man, oh man, how good a year did he have?
He did, and they bring those different strengths. It's, at times during the year, you would have thought Beauden Barrett was the lock, for the 10, and then Aaron Cruden would step up as well. They offer slightly different things, but I think what they both offer more than we have in Australian rugby. And you touched on it a second ago. You mentioned kicking game. It's really that capacity to manage a team around the park, of which kicking is an enormous part.
Yeah.
We haven't had that strength at number 10 to control a game. And one of my greatest bugbears about Australian rugby is who is teaching these kids to kick who are coming through. The kicking games and our strength in goal kicking and general kicking around the park has been a problem for some time.
Well, we haven't had it since Stephen Larkham was fly half. And the issue there is that Stephen Larkham is the backs coach for Australia.
And with a little bit of respect to Elton Flatley, who kicked us into a World Cup final, goal kicking, I'd say since Matt Burke, we haven't had what I would say, that metronomic goal kicker who steps up, and you just know South Africa seemed to turn them out, England seemed to turn them out, New Zealand seemed to turn them out. Guys who, you get a 3-point option anywhere within about 43 metres and, 5 metres of the sideline, and you are going to take it because 95% of the time it's going through the sticks. We struggle. Guys go off the ball, they shank, and I reckon it's right back to Matthew Burke. Matthew Burke, I used to have faith that it was going to go, right? And now, ever since then, we haven't had someone who you just felt, that's points. See what England did to us.
Absolutely. And that's because they can build pressure. And, chip away. You get into that zone, in that 40-metre zone, and you can ping, say, 3 opportunities. That's 9 points. all of a sudden you start to build the pressure and the team's chasing at the other end. And when you chase, you sort of fall apart, don't you?
Yeah.
And you give the opposition opportunity. So, but is the Super Rugby form relevant when it comes to this Test match on Saturday, Ben?
Well, we've got a happy history in Australian rugby of taking a different step up for the Wallabies. We've always had a position where New Zealand rugby across the board, one step down, has been stronger than us, and always has been, probably always will be the way that we're going at the moment. So, bringing together the different parts, the many into the one team, anything can happen, but you've got to feel like it's going to be a problem. Guys who've been beaten around this year, and I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but the number of games we played against the New Zealand sides and the number that we won, there's got to be something that affects the players. They can't come in, rip ready to go, unless what we see here is what Michael Cheika, we've talked about Cheika's potential strengths and weaknesses. If it's his capacity to get a team mentally ready that he's best at, this is the best opportunity he's going to have to do that.
And what about defence? I mean, obviously, if the All Blacks are under pressure and they struggle to score points for, say, 50, 60 minutes, you do notice that New Zealand sides tend to start a little bit of panic and the door opens for the opposition. Is the Australian because you need to know what your fellow player is doing in that defensive alignment. Can Australia get their defensive alignment and line speed to an extent where it does pressure the New Zealanders and makes them, force them in the error, forces New Zealand to panic?
Well, I think that was something that they did get right through the World Cup, right? And I think my belief is the mindset of a team is as important to structure and defence. Clearly, structure is very important,
yes.
but I think you can really see that come up. We saw it in the World Cup against Wales. We saw it, through that tournament that the Australian defence was really on the game, and it was because mentally you could see they were into it and they were up for it. But it gets down to the basics of the game. One of my questions for you would be: do you think that the Australian team, in wanting to play upbeat rugby, got away from the basics? And it's often the basics that has cost us over those years, from the scrum and the line out to the kicking game to our defence. Just getting those basics right, which enables you to play an upbeat game. It's got to be the foundation.
Yeah, to do that, you have to play the basics well. And I've seen many comments this year that were critical of the Waratahs season, which unfortunately some of the basics let them down in matches that required just basically catch and pass and a lot of drop ball. Funnily enough, though, even the Lions, who, great credit for them to make it to the Super Rugby final, really just coughed up a bit of easy ball as well. So if you don't bring the basic skill set against New Zealand, sorry, I've had 2 beers, the skill set against New Zealand, then you are going to lose before you even, get 5 minutes into the game.
That's it. You talked about pressure before. If you don't get your basics right, and by the basics, that defensive structure and that game management, then you're going to get stung. But the capacity for teams that have a good 5'8" who can control a game, who has a good, strong kicking game, who can look at it and say, we're under pressure here, I'm just going to put it 45 down the park and find touch, we'll trot up there and put a good, solid challenge in the line out, as opposed to skewing it across the park and all of a sudden the pressure you're trying to relieve is doubled down on top of you. And as you know, when you play a team like New Zealand, it's they call it the 1%ers. The 1%ers are going to make them a massive difference.
How does the Australian side then move on from the disappointment of the England series? Can they successfully check that one and move on? It's a bit hard to think about that when you've got the All Blacks running at you. But, in the quiet moments, they might be thinking, we can't let that happen again.
Well, the good thing is it's a number of weeks back now.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys haven't even played rugby for 4 weeks. Blessing or a curse that we missed the Super Rugby final. We don't have battle-hardened guys, but the team's got to be really fully fit and nice and relaxed going in. We'll soon see if they can start from minute one the way an All Black side that have a lot more guys who've been smashing it up for a bit longer at the heart of their team. Now, the England thing, I don't know. I feel like it's a little bit back there, so perhaps you could put it out of there. What'll be interesting is also the last time they played this All Blacks team, Their hearts were torn out of their chest and left beating on the park. Yeah. I mean, that's really what happened to them. They believed they were going to be World Cup champions. They got to that game, and mixed bag of a game, but they did turn it up and turn it on and thought, actually, we're going to do this, before it fell apart.
With guys like Drew Mitchell and and Matt Giddo, it does burn and very deeply that they haven't been able to carry that silverware, the Bledisloe Cup, the mighty Bledisloe Cup. And so it's a great trophy too. If you ever get a chance to drink out of it, please do. But there's a sort of technique where you've got to lap the beer out of it.
Wipe first.
Yeah, there's been toxic people in there. So there's one thing there. The psychology of approaching a game like that, where you're so obsessed by actually winning it, you got to be careful not to play your game too early, which is the result. And I know the professional players always want to put the procedure in front of them, then they get the benefit of the result down the end. And the players all say that, but saying it and living it on the field is one thing, because they're desperate to win the Bledisloe. There's a desperation on this side of the Tasman. On the other side, they've won everything. They've had it for a long time. But new players come in all the time, and it's that whole Queensland Rugby League thing. The new players come in, they experience the success of the players that have already been there, and they keep getting dragged along. The legend continues, and that's what Australia has to deal with.
Yeah, and to your question around how they'll mentally prepare, one of the things I do like about these players from Europe coming in is as a group, you look at Giddo, you look at Adam Ashley Cooper in particular, and Drew Mitchell. They're guys who really know how to enjoy their rugby. They bring a personality to the team that kind of lacks sometimes in the footballers that you deal with. A little bit biased in being an old rugby journo in that you want the guys who'll say something.
Yeah.
But those guys will say something. They're honest. They're upfront. They're very confident. They have a good time, and I could see how they would add an element to the team that Checker would think is very valuable. That confidence in themselves. They've been around the block. They've done it before. But also, they're not just grizzled old veterans. These guys have some fun, and I think they'd bring a nice element of that to the team.
It's funny, I remember being part of the management team when Matt Giddo made his debut against England, and he was such a pimply little kid, and now he's a very mature player, and I just love the fact how these players go to France. So I actually don't mind the fact that they come back and play for Australia. I think it's pretty cool. I think there's enough space in Europe and in Australia, the different competitions, and you've seen how players from overseas in Europe, they want to have a go at Super Rugby because it's a lot faster, a lot different to play, and yet I think the other one is a tighter game in the Northern Hemisphere, and in particular months is going to give you more like a test match experience. So I think it's great that those players are back, ready to take on the Kiwis. So what do you think? What's the score going to be like on Saturday night?
Well, I think we're going to get done by about 15 points, to be honest. I just don't think 4 weeks off a poor Super Rugby season, coming up against an All Blacks team who've had a lot of success this year in their players in the Super Rugby competition, coming together. And I think there's the All Blacks, it'll be a bit of that change up for them. A couple of their senior figures moved on, Dan Carter, Richie McCaw. You can't underplay the difference in those guys in and out of a team. We'll have to see how these young, hungry players, how they step into the breach and how they take hold of it. I think you've got to say you'd be more of a chance to rattle this side than you would have with a Carter McCaw led team. But I just think that if we were coming off the back of a couple of other test matches, maybe I'd feel a bit more confident about it. But I just feel like the All Blacks will have too much of the Super Rugby momentum behind them to be stopped this weekend.
Even a great start won't be enough for Australia. Look at the first test against England, out of the blocks, pulsating rugby, side to side, went to an early lead, but then England chipped away and got them back. It was almost to a detriment that Australia had that early lead, got it quite easily, and I've seen that so many times with Australian teams, the Waratahs in the past. So I think I'm not too worried about the Super Rugby form because it's a different beast, Test rugby, and when the team comes together, it also is a different unit. However, I think it might be just beyond Australia, which would be a shame because if Australia doesn't win this first one, then the Bledisloe Cup is gone for another year. So that'll be disappointing. But let's hope big crowd gets behind them and it's a great contest. So the Bledisloe isn't the only big deal for us in this podcast this week because Sevens Rugby made a spectacular debut in the Olympics in Rio. And I thought the women's competition was tremendous. I've been doing several stories over the last 4 years on the Australian sevens team, and it's changed a lot. And the fact that a lot of these players came from rugby league, from touch football, all sorts of different backgrounds, and Tim Walsh got them together and made them a really good unit. And they won the World Championship, and they went on to win the Olympics. Ben Kimber, what are your thoughts?
I loved it. Absolutely loved it. Watched a fair bit of it. The women's sevens team, what a great story. Set up there with what a
and playing New Zealand in the final.
Yeah, playing New Zealand in the final in particular, and New Zealand being such a dominant rugby force, and prior to sevens, New Zealand women's rugby being such a dominant force, and you got to look back and say, great piece of strategic work on Australia's part to build that team up over a few years. One of the interesting things, and you may have some insight for us here, was to read in the press. I mean, Bill Pulver was almost doing a lap with the trophy there at the finish. He was so pleased with what was going on.
He's done a John O'Neill.
Well, then we saw a Roy Masters piece that came out and said that John O'Neill, there was an email going around with O'Neill thanking Noosa for and the guys who kicked it off originally.
Yeah.
I mean, where was the genesis of this sevens victory for the women, do you think?
Oh, I think it started several years ago when they decided to recruit players, great athletes from...
Was that the O'Neill era?
It's a bit hard to say, actually. I think was that O'Neill, was Gary Flowers in O'Neill? It might have been. Yeah. I remember years ago when AAU did not care about women's rugby at all. So I absolutely railed against that. So I'm glad to see that they put some resources. I know that big Billy Pulver put some dosh behind the bar over in Rio for the girls to celebrate. But we've got mums in the team and great families that are attached to them, and some of the players didn't get to play in the event either in Rio, but massive family, and they played a really, really well drilled style of game as well. There's a bit of flair there too, but I thought the skill level was tremendous. The double pumps often to trick the opposition. The defence is fantastic. I know there's some controversy about at least one of the tries for Australia. But
as a try.
But in the end, I don't think anyone could say Australia was the best team on the night and thoroughly deserved their victory. New Zealand very humble as well, although the Kiwi coach did fire up the Australians beforehand with some comments in the press. But at the end of it was all done very well. The New Zealanders were fantastic as well and brought to tears by the emotion of losing that final. So, the women's sevens competition is absolutely killing it, and it was just wonderful to watch.
That was why it was like a convergence of a few great streams there. Rugby's debut, rugby's return to the Olympic arena. Sevens debut, women's rugby, and in an Olympics where women's sport has really come to the fore. Mate, to see my 6-year-old boy, his 7-year-old under 7 soccer team, arms around each other, watching the Matildas penalty shootout, to sitting up in the morning and watching the women's sevens rugby. Fantastic. And I'll tell you, about 12 or 18 months ago, I was probably neither here nor there on sevens. Yeah. I've really started to enjoy it more and more. And to watch the game, it was a fantastic Olympics event too, because the intensity of those games, 7 minutes each way, 10 minutes each way, and you kind of forget, but all of a sudden they're spreading the ball, and every time they spread the ball, there's 30 metres of park to cover with three people. It is a tough game.
Tough game.
It's a very tough game.
So when it goes to 10 minutes for the playoffs in the final, it is really tough on the bodies. So the girls, the boys, they're all fit. So congratulations to the Australians women's sevens team and Walshy, the coach. He deserves a lot of credit too. Did a great job. And they trained at Narrabeen, that's their base in northern Sydney. So they did a really good job, and I sort of felt a little bit of ownership because I've done so many stories on them, and I was so happy to see them do so well because they had a plan, they executed it beautifully, and they did it through the World Championship. They managed that well, and they got to Rio. Tremendous job. As we get close to wrapping up, Ben, in our Swish Hotel, let's talk about the men's sevens competition and Fiji. How good was that to see Fiji win and the celebrations? If anything is spiritual about the game, then Fiji winning in sevens is certainly at the top of that list.
Mate, thoroughly enjoyable to watch. And didn't they dominate that final? Just absolutely smashed Great Britain off the park.
How do they do it without Jared Hayne?
Oh, who knows? But I did read an article by him saying that he felt he helped them to the title, which was nice of him.
Yeah.
Helped their dream,
Or did he
perhaps.
fly the plane?
But what a great feel-good story. I mean, they really do. The Fiji's first Olympic gold medal, probably the most dominant sevens team over time, claims the title, and what it means to the team. To hear them talking about it, I think one of the quotes I read after the game was when they won the world title the last time. The 3-hour drive from Nadi to Suva took them 9 hours. And they said this time they think it's going to take them a lot longer because everyone in the entire country will be mobbing them. Absolutely fantastic story.
Yes, also known as Nandi.
Nandi,
Ben.
sorry.
Yeah, so I thought it was Mark Cashman sitting next to me.
I got some of the syllables right.
But the thing about I saw a comment by I think it was Francis Cullimore who said on social media that he loved the sevens result, but thought it was a bit too regimented, a bit too planned, taken over by coaches, and that's what's going to happen. Teams will have coaches and they will try and strategise a way to play, and it becomes a bit more mechanical. Sevens with these guys is a bit more flair and making it up as you go, playing what's in front of you. But I think the fact that Fiji continues to dominate is a big vote for the flair as well.
Well, one of the interesting things will be to see the way that New Zealand dissects their performance. No one, guts the corpse and performs an autopsy quicker than New Zealand rugby, and they'll be right in there and working out what's going on. I saw a bit of social media chatter about that, whether Gordon, the coach, has been there a bit long, whether they went too many big guys. But I remember seeing Sonny Bill debut over the last year in sevens, and I saw him get skinned a few times by some of these quicker, more agile players.
I thought it was a bad idea.
Yeah, I think credit to the Australian team who didn't get the results, but they didn't go down that tempting path of picking a Quade Cooper or someone who didn't actually play sevens.
Because that was all the talk. Remember when they had sevens at the Commonwealth Games?
Yeah.
And picking all sorts of superstars. So I think you're absolutely right. Australia did make the right call. I just don't think we're good enough to compete in the 1-2 zone every tournament. We're doing okay.
Yeah. Now, I think the other thing interesting about sevens is how many players don't seem to come through the sevens program. And I think Bernard Foley's one who did. Yeah. But you don't tend to find these guys who get a fantastic grilling in fitness and defence and gameplay, but it doesn't seem to be a pathway. It seems to be its own sport more and more. Would you agree with that? Yeah,
I think so. I think it's definitely it's a specialist sport, and it would have been great if you could do both. But I think the days of that are really, and Sonny Bill's a great example, the days of being a sevens player and a 15s player are really becoming limited. And you just got to see how hard it was for Jared Hayne to also do it. But when he came back to rugby league, he absolutely dominated. It's like he never left. In fact, he looks like a better rugby league player now from his experience in the NFL. But it's got to be one of the worst decisions of all time to run on the park in London for a minute, surely, Jared Hayne. Just close the door on the Wallabies, close the door on all of that for something that he was never going to make. Yeah. But, he's happy with his big deal at the Titans, so which is pretty good. Just as we wind it up, Ben, anything else you'd like to add as we close show 216? Mate, just wanted to, very sincerely give our best wishes to Christian Lalifano. Absolutely, yeah. Really horrible news, and it just really sort of knocked you around when you read that. You forget what it's like coming back to reality sometimes, what people go through. But wishing him all the best. Yeah. So Christian Lalifano was diagnosed with leukemia, and I was just as shocked to hear the news as well. So our best wishes to him. He's got a great family support system there and a great community too. He's just a terrific fellow too, so yeah. Well, let's hope we see him back in that Wallaby team sooner rather than later. Absolutely. All right, Ben Kimber, thanks for coming to the hotel tonight. Very nice. I think we should do it here all the time. And I don't think they'd let someone like Mark Cashman in the building, so you were the only guy to come in. Thank you. So there is Ben Kimber. I've been Juro Sen as usual, bringing our latest episode of RuggaMatrix to you. We'll be back next week with a special guest post Bledisloe 1. In the new studio? In the new studio, so cannot wait for that. And we'll be able to bring in our special guests through our video wall over our shoulder. So in the meantime, we might check out a few new UHD 4K HDR movies, Ben.
Awesome.
All right. Until next week, enjoy the Bledisloe Cup, and we'll see you on RuggaMatrix next episode 2117.